Why did you get fired? My manager kept losing my class schedule. Worked at a Subway. I had class 2 days a week. Several times he put me on those days anyway. I gave him multiple copies every time. Owner took me off the schedule for calling out too much. When I showed the owner proof, he said it was too late and they already hired someone else. This was 12 years ago. I'm still mad. A business I went to long ago was hiring and I got the job. Right after I signed all the paperwork, the department manager comes in and asks who I am. I tell him I was just hired as a temp. Manger says he never authorized any hiring and fired both me and my boss on the spot. I did not work for this company at all and they fired me. I was denied a raise by HR after consistently working 60 to 70 hours weeks, and my VP, who had supported and requested the raise for me, told me to stop putting in the extra time, work my 40, and spend that extra time applying to new jobs. Within a month, a meeting was called to mutually part ways, because my work wasn't getting done. I was gratified to learn that they had to hire 2 people to do my job after I left. I got fired once for putting in my 2-week notice. The only other time I've gotten fired was working for a trade company, during the first week. I was a supervisor, and there was a second supervisor on site. I got a call that my wife had been rushed to the hospital, which was literally less than a mile away. I asked the other supervisor if I could go to attend to her, and he said, "Sure, no problem, I've got things here. Go." I returned to the job site later to find the boss there, and he let me go on the spot for leaving the team without a supervisor. He knew what had happened, and still fired me. I won't lie, that one kind of pissed me off. For doing my job too quickly and sitting down the rest of the time. Gas station cashier 3rd shift. Me, why should I stand when I'm the only person in the store? Manager, it's more professional to stand than sit. Me, then why do you sit in your office? This isn't why I got fired, but this is why I didn't get a job. I was 16 and looking to work at a Dairy Queen as my first job. My mom drove me to the interview and I was super nervous. She looked me in the eye and said, "Just be honest, and be yourself, and you'll do fine." I walked into that interview and when he asked me, "How long do you think you'll work here?" I responded, "Until something better comes along." I went to the emergency room instead of work. Came back with an ER note and they said, "We won't be needing that. Can you come with us?" I was 18 and it was my first full-time job. I talked my way into a job at a software company when they put a hiring notice in a local paper. I had no idea what the software did. I still don't. They hired me as a trainer and no one ever explained what the product was. I did a few weeks where I was trained on the software but literally none of it ever made sense to me. It was like they were speaking gibberish. One day I showed up, a lady I had never seen before gave me a check, and walked me out to the parking lot. No one even ever said, "You're fired," or anything. It's one of the strangest things that ever happened to me. My parole officer wanted to make sure I actually had a job, so he went to my employer listed on my file to surprise visit me on the job. I did home wiring, so I worked at different job sites and rarely in the office. He called me to say he was going to charge me with a violation for lying to him about my whereabouts. This could have landed me back in prison for my remaining 10.5-year sentence. The owner of the company had to speak with him and vouch for me. My parole office didn't charge me. But the owner sure did fire me that day. Finding a job with a felony isn't an easy thing, and it wasn't long before my PO threatened to charge me with a violation if I didn't find a job soon. I refused to come in 15 to 20 minutes early unpaid for my shift. I was always 5 to 10 minutes early but they decided they wanted me there earlier. I carried on as normal as I'm not coming in if I'm not being paid. Turned up for a 12 p.m. shift at 11:49. No one would look at me when I arrived, then was thrown in a meeting and fired for being late. Was out the door before it even hit 12. It was the only time I've ever been fired. His wife thought he was having an affair with the office manager. He asked me if I thought it was possible that he was having an affair with the office manager. I said, "It's possible, but I don't think you are. I could see why your wife might think so too." I was 21 and naive as hell. Never should have said anything. I built a snow scorpion sculpture. I used ketchup for the red glowing eyes and everything, on a particularly miserable day at a ski resort. The guests enjoyed my sculpture very much, management weren't so happy. I was an entitled little shit with a summer job between my junior and senior years in college. I thought I was getting a data entry job. It was indeed data entry to an extent, but most of the work was actually taking items off the shelves in a warehouse and taking pictures of them. These pictures would be scanned and then entered into a system with a description. I thought this was below somebody with my obvious skills as an engineering student, who had failed to secure a summer internship in his field. I told my boss that the work was really a two-person job, the other person could do the warehouse stuff, and she agreed and said she'd look into finding another intern to help. I took that to mean I could slack off posting on Warcraft 3 forums all day until they hired the other guy. One day I came home to a voicemail telling me to not bother coming back. I 100% deserved it. I hate my younger self sometimes. They sent me home because I sneezed and I was forced to get tested for COVID. Then when I tested negative, I was terminated for abusing pandemic policies to stay home. I was 19 and working as a janitor at a large self-storage facility, where most days were filled with sweeping and mopping endless hallways of flickering fluorescent light. And when someone went delinquent on their bill, after a 3-month grace period, I would be instructed to empty their unit and dump everything in the trash outside. Once or twice it was a person who died, but otherwise it was pretty common to see a room full of absolute junk that someone got tired of paying for. Banged up furniture, garbage bags of ratty clothing, stacks of old magazines. It was usually pretty hoarder-friendly stuff, and not that I'd want any of it, but the policy was I had to throw it into the dumpster outside no matter what it was. One day I get notified to empty out a unit, so I grab the bin, cut the lock, fling open the gate. The room is full of huge cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling. I open one up out of curiosity, and it's full of brand new, unopened Gundam models. The entire room is full of them, dozens of boxes with dozens of models in each. And I'm talking the $50 to $100 ones I saw for sale at my local comics shop every week. The manager would check up on me once or twice a day, and that morning he walked up and I showed him all of the brand new merchandise and said there has to be a better system than trashing all of this. He said rules are rules, something about insurance I didn't understand, and told me to throw them all away. So I went and I backed up one of the complimentary U-Haul style box trucks, picked a few models out for myself, and loaded it up the truck with the rest of it. On my lunch break I drove over to the Children's Resource Center that I'd volunteered at during high school. It's a place where any child, but usually poorer ones, would go after school for arts and crafts and activities to keep them busy until their parents got home. The people at the drop-off dock were so grateful. Before I even left they were handing them out to some extremely excited kids. Drove back to the self-storage place with enough time to eat a sandwich and smoke a cigarette before clocking back in. But that's not why I got fired. I got fired because the manager came to check on me that afternoon, and after a while of looking around, found me sitting cross-legged on the floor of the janitor closet with model parts spread all around me, happily assembling a sweet translucent Zaka model. I was so entranced I didn't even hear him come in. I just hear this long, drawn-out, exasperated sigh. I look up and he just says, "Keys," and that was that. I spent the rest of the week assembling Zaku's and Valkyries and lying to my parents about getting replaced with a Roomba. I asked the CNA I was working with to stay with a confused patient, while I went and put a new 4 in another patient. The CNA left the patient alone. She fell out of bed and got a big bloody skin tear on her arm. After I took care of that, I went and found the CNA and told her the patient was injured because of her insubordination. The CNA cussed at me and left the unit. I did not see her again that shift. She and another CNA decided on their own to trade assignments. I wrote the CNA up. The CNA went to management and lied about me. She said I called her by a racial slur and yelled at her. I did neither. Management fired me rather than deal with a false claim of racism. I collected unemployment. The CNA did something similar with another nurse a couple of weeks later, and was fired. My manager asked if I could be rehired. HR said no. When my manager quit to start her own nursing agency a year later, she hired me. I got fired for submitting my time sheets on Monday at 8 a.m. when I got into work. By policy, they were to be in by noon on Saturday, but my Fridays ended in the field, so I just did them on Monday mornings. My bosses didn't even look at them until noon on Tuesday, so it had zero impact on them. I drove home from being fired feeling relieved because of how unhappy I was at that job. Worked in a DIY store. 10 minutes before my shift ended, I moved a pallet cage of paint cans, slowly, to the warehouse, and when I got in there one of the sides came off along with half of the paint cans, which spilt all over. Anyway, there was about 2 minutes of my shift left. So I moved the pallet over the paint, covering it a bit, and went home. It was all caught on CCTV. For getting lunch. I was 18, working at a mall kiosk with a manager title, even though I managed nothing, for something like $8 per hour. Hours painted on the door, zero support or other employees to relieve for a break. The owner showed up while I had locked up to go get a bite to eat. Fired on the spot. Because my job was eliminated. This was code for getting rid of you and hiring someone to replace you at half the salary. Their scheme was less than a stellar success because the person they hired was an idiot and could not do it. The customers got severely pissed. They gave me $15K severance if I promised not to sue them. I took their money and still sued them for age discrimination, and won. After 3 years of working, decided I wanted 2 days off, and the owner gave me the go-ahead. Was a couple weeks after both my grandmother and great-grandmother died, within about a week of each other, so I wanted to get a little vacation with my nuclear family. The day before my 2 days off, the manager, not the owner, told me I couldn't take the 2 days off, and if I didn't show up I'd surely be fired. Gave her a quick "fuck you," finished my day and never went back. No regrets. I was working at an amusement park. Awful job, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. To give an example of their shittiness, the office wouldn't give me a week off for college orientation. They just wouldn't. I told the girl point blank when she refused, "That's cool, but I'm not coming into work." Ended up writing me up every day I was gone, and I came back to a week of write-ups. Luckily my supervisor was cool and tossed them. When I gave my 2 weeks notice, bitch office lady wasn't happy. I was like, I'm leaving for college. Live with it. The next week I noticed she'd scheduled me past my last day, so I went in to talk to her about it. She acted all rude about it, and when I checked my schedule again, she'd not only left them, but changed my shifts for the last week, so my hours were much shittier than normal. Didn't bother to inform me either. Never went back. Got a call 2 days later saying I would be written up if I didn't return to work. Okay, cool, I've already quit. Day I was leaving for college they called again, must have been desperate for employees I guess, and told me if I wasn't there in an hour I was fired. I just hung up at that point. Worked for a rather large miniature gaming company in their retail store back in 2000. We'd have some great fun at weekend meetings after work at a local games and drinks establishment in the same mall. Our manager would tell us to shut down the store. But don't worry about going over and making the money drops, he'll do that after the meetings. This happened a few times and no one really gave it a thought. Cut to a few months later. We have an unpleasant briefing in the store about how money has gone missing on more than one occasion, and this had happened while the assistant manager was working. So, he was fired for that. A few days later another meeting, another employee gets fired. A week later and it was my turn. The guy that was next in line after us kept good notes and he gave those notes to the regional manager. Each bag that had missing money in it was dated on the nights we had our meetings. No surprise, the manager was the one stealing the cash, the newbie was the one that caught him. The company's response was to blacklist the fired employees from the store and admit no wrongdoing. But, that got me out of retail, so I got that going for me, which is nice. I was at a shitty call center job where you got fired if your call time was consistently lower than 20 seconds or something. I was nearly at that point, so I just left my call on one of those lube menus while I went for a cigarette break. Turns out the calls were monitored more closely than I thought. Oh well. Myself and another guy were hired at a bagel store at roughly the same time and we shared a shift. He was skimming money from my till when I wasn't looking, was on break, or was in the back. It wasn't possible to be at the till all the time. Rather than figure it out, they just fired us both. It got comical after that, as they tried to deduct my wages for the money this guy took. That was against the law, so when I got my last check I called up one of the owners. Conversation went like this. Me, so you deducted from my wages without my consent, which is illegal, and I would like my money. Lady, screaming, we told you when you started to watch your till at all times because you were responsible the money inside. Me, I'm okay. Well, if you don't pay me I am going to file a complaint with the labor board. Lady, still screaming, you do that. Hangs up. So I filed a complaint and 3 weeks later she was forced to write me a check for $80. Totally worth it. Drinking on the job. I was a bartender and would drink samples of the craft beers we had on tap. Apparently I did it too much. I'm really embarrassed about it. I pulled into the parking lot one morning, ready for work, and was met by the manager saying that someone complained saying I was drinking behind the bar. I was hired to be the front of office person to a physical therapist who was opening her own private practice. We were friends. 2 weeks later, she fired me because I couldn't design a new website for her. I was like, WTF, I signed up to answer phones. Had been working at a company for 12 months, and at the time my dad nearly died from a heart attack. We needed to see how much money was coming into the house and he asked me for pay slips. What are they? I asked. I never got any. So I go to my employer asking for them. He goes, yeah, I'll sort it. A week goes by, nothing. Then another week, nothing. I then go in and ask and he said, oh yeah, the payroll machine is down. I tell him that's a joke, isn't it? We then have a massive argument. I go back the next day, he's expecting an apology. I ask him does he have my pay slip, he says no, so I ask him why does he think I should apologize to him. He fires me on the spot. Turns out they'd been deducting tax from our paychecks but not paying the taxman. Just pocketed it themselves. Fuck them though, I've had the last laugh. My director walks into our office in shirt and shorts. I didn't know who was the director at the time, as I've only been at this IT job for 5 months. Most of that time was spent at a different location. He asks my honest opinion of my job and if I could improve anything. So I gave him my honest opinion, which was mostly positive, and I pointed out some flaws in our ticketing system and how to improve it. 2 weeks later, my manager, at the request of my director, told me I wasn't fired, but I would no longer have hours. TLDR, your boss doesn't want your honest opinion, he wants you to stroke his ego. We've reached the end of the video once again. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to get notified whenever my next video drops, make sure to subscribe. I'm posting once or twice a week. Also, let me know your thoughts on the stories. Until next time.